the cruelest goodbyes are never the ones we see coming, they're the ones we mistake for ordinary moments. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now, back to Evelyn. Rain drifted across the towering walls of Blackstone Keep like silver threads beneath a dark autumn sky, washing the ancient stone in a quiet sadness that no servant dared mention aloud. At the bottom of the marble staircase, Evelyn Carter tightened her fingers around the worn leather strap of a small travel bag. It held almost nothing. A folded shawl. A family photograph faded by time. A weathered journal she had never allowed anyone else to read. Everything else she owned remained inside the castle she had once believed would become her forever home. She paused beneath the great iron gates, her pale face illuminated by the flickering lanterns as cold wind lifted loose strands of her chestnut hair. Her blue eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall until no one could see them. Behind her, the castle buzzed with preparations for another council meeting. Soldiers hurried across the courtyard. Advisors carried stacks of maps into the great hall. Servants rushed from one corridor to another. Life continued exactly as it always had, as though the quiet woman walking away had never mattered at all. High above, standing near the balcony outside the royal chamber, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood watched the gates without truly seeing them. His broad shoulders remained perfectly still beneath his dark coat as he listened to yet another report about neighboring territories and trade routes. One of his generals noticed his distant gaze and offered a faint smile. "She probably just needs some time," the older man said. "She always comes back." Adrian answered with a slow nod, though something inside him felt strangely unsettled. Evelyn had never left without saying goodbye before. But pride had become an invisible wall between them over the past several months. Too many conversations had ended in silence. Too many apologies had remained unspoken. He convinced himself that tomorrow would be enough. Tomorrow he would explain. Tomorrow he would ask why her smile had disappeared. Tomorrow he would tell her he had noticed the exhaustion hidden behind her gentle eyes. Tomorrow always seemed close enough to reach. At the gate, Evelyn looked back one final time. The rain blurred the outline of the castle where she had laughed, cried, hoped, and waited for love to become stronger than duty. She searched the highest balcony, almost expecting Adrian to appear and call her name. Only the wind answered. A faint smile touched her lips, filled not with anger but with quiet acceptance. "Take care of yourself," she whispered so softly that even she barely heard the words. Then she stepped beyond the gates and disappeared into the mist-covered road stretching toward the distant forest. The guards watched her go without understanding why the sight felt heavier than any farewell they had witnessed before. Above them, Adrian finally turned away from the balcony as another advisor placed a parchment before him. He signed it absent-mindedly, never realizing that the woman walking into the rain carried a secret she had protected for months, and that every step she took farther from Blackstone Keep carried her beyond the future they had once promised each other. Long after the sound of her footsteps had faded, the empty road remained, waiting like a memory that would soon become the greatest regret of a king who believed there would always be another sunrise. 3 days earlier, Blackstone Keep had felt warmer than anyone remembered, as though autumn itself had decided to linger a little longer within its ancient walls. Morning sunlight spilled across the castle gardens where white roses swayed gently beside stone paths polished by generations of royal footsteps. Evelyn Carter moved quietly through the courtyard carrying a woven basket filled with fresh herbs gathered before sunrise. She greeted every servant by name, stopping whenever someone looked troubled, offering a patient smile that seemed to ease worries without needing many words. A young stable boy struggled to calm an anxious horse frightened by distant thunder. Before anyone else could react, Evelyn approached slowly, resting one gentle hand against the horse's neck. Her calm voice drifted through the crisp air until the frightened animal relaxed, lowering its head as if recognizing an old friend. The stable hands exchanged surprised glances, but Evelyn simply smiled and continued walking as though kindness required no applause. Inside the castle infirmary, she spent hours preparing healing teas for elderly villagers who had traveled nearly 20 miles seeking relief from aching joints and lingering fevers. The royal physicians often received the praise, yet many quietly admitted that Lady Evelyn's careful attention soothed hearts just as much as medicine comforted weary bodies. Children always searched for her first whenever they visited the castle. She remembered birthdays, favorite stories, and even the names of handmade toys each child proudly carried through the grand halls. By noon, laughter echoed beneath the high ceilings as Evelyn knelt beside a little girl practicing her reading lessons. The child stumbled over difficult words, cheeks turning pink with embarrassment, but Evelyn never corrected her with impatience. Instead, she celebrated every sentence completed, making confidence bloom where doubt had lived only moments before. From the second-floor balcony, Adrian Blackwood noticed the scene while reviewing reports with his council. He watched the children surrounding Evelyn, their smiles brighter than the afternoon sun, yet his attention was quickly pulled back toward discussions about border agreements, harvest forecasts, and winter supplies. His responsibilities never seemed to end. Every hour demanded another decision. Every messenger carried another concern requiring immediate judgment. He often promised himself that once peace settled across the kingdom, he would spend more time beside the woman who had quietly become the heart of his home. But peace always remained just beyond the next season. That evening, the castle gathered for supper beneath glittering chandeliers. Nobles praised Adrian's leadership while musicians filled the hall with soft melodies. Evelyn sat beside him. Exactly where Aluna belonged, elegant but almost invisible amid endless conversations about politics and alliances. Several times she turned toward Adrian, hoping to share a simple thought or quiet smile, but another advisor always interrupted before the moment could begin. She lowered her eyes and folded her hands, hiding the disappointment that had become painfully familiar. After dinner, they walked together across the moonlit terrace in comfortable silence. Adrian finally noticed how pale she looked beneath the silver light. "You seem tired lately," he said gently. Evelyn offered the same reassuring smile she always wore whenever someone worried about her. "It is only the changing season," she answered. "I will be fine." Adrian accepted her words because he wanted to believe them. He never questioned why her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly when the evening breeze grew colder, or why she paused for just a heartbeat before climbing each flight of stairs. As the castle lights flickered behind them, Evelyn looked toward the endless forest stretching beyond the kingdom, her expression carrying a quiet sadness no one else had learned to read. Somewhere deep inside, she already understood that time was moving far more quickly than the man standing beside her could possibly imagine. The following morning arrived beneath heavy gray clouds that settled over Blackstone Keep like an unspoken warning. A cool wind swept across the castle towers, carrying the scent of approaching rain as messengers hurried through the gates with sealed letters from neighboring territories. Adrian Blackwood had barely finished breakfast before another emergency council session demanded his attention. Grain shipments had been delayed, trade agreements required new signatures, and rumors of unrest along the western border filled every conversation with quiet urgency. Evelyn Carter watched the endless procession of advisors disappear into the council chamber, then gently folded the untouched scarf she had spent 3 evenings weaving for Adrian before placing it inside a wooden chest. She had planned to give it to him that morning, but once again there had been no moment that truly belonged to them. As the castle settled into another busy day, an unfamiliar noblewoman arrived from a neighboring province. Lady Victoria Ashcroft carried herself with flawless confidence, speaking with polished charm that immediately captured the attention of many within the court. She complimented the castle, praised Adrian's leadership, and seemed to know exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. Evelyn welcomed her with genuine kindness, never suspecting that someone could smile so warmly while quietly planting seeds of doubt. Throughout the afternoon, Victoria made certain that every misunderstanding appeared completely innocent. A delayed message intended for Adrian somehow found its way into Evelyn's sitting room before being discovered by the wrong servant. A private conversation between Evelyn and an elderly village healer was overheard only halfway through, making ordinary words sound strangely suspicious. Even a simple gift basket prepared for orphan children was subtly rearranged until expensive royal supplies appeared to have vanished without explanation. None of these moments proved anything on their own, but together they began forming a story that had never truly existed. By sunset, whispers drifted through the marble corridors with surprising speed. Servants lowered their voices whenever Evelyn approached. Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. Adrian noticed the unusual atmosphere immediately, yet every person who spoke insisted they were only concerned for the kingdom. They never accused Evelyn directly. Instead, they offered careful suggestions wrapped inside respectful questions. Could someone be taking advantage of her trusting nature? Had confidential information somehow reached outsiders? Was it possible that kindness alone could sometimes become dangerous? Adrian dismissed the rumors at first, refusing to believe the woman he loved could ever intentionally harm anyone. Yet doubt, once invited inside the mind, rarely remained quiet. That evening he found Evelyn standing alone in the royal library, arranging returned books exactly where they belonged. The warm glow from the fireplace reflected across rows of leather-bound volumes while silence stretched gently between them. Adrian wanted to ask whether everything was all right, but the words refused to come naturally. Evelyn sensed the hesitation immediately. She looked into his silver eyes and noticed something she had never seen there before. Not anger. Not disappointment. Simply uncertainty. It lasted only a heartbeat, but it settled heavily inside her heart. She smiled anyway, hoping to spare him the discomfort of difficult questions. Adrian almost reached for her hand before another knock echoed through the library doors. A royal advisor entered carrying yet another sealed document requiring the king's immediate attention. Duty claimed him once again. As Adrian turned away, Evelyn quietly watched the distance between them grow wider than the few feet separating their bodies. Somewhere beyond the castle windows, thunder rolled softly across the darkening sky, and although neither of them understood it yet, trust had already begun slipping away one silent misunderstanding at a time. The rain finally arrived before dawn, wrapping Blackstone Keep in a quiet gray curtain that blurred the distant mountains into fading shadows. Every stone corridor seemed colder than usual as whispers spread faster than footsteps. By mid-morning, another sealed report had reached Adrian Blackwood's council table. This time the accusations were no longer vague suggestions. Missing records, altered schedules, and confidential conversations had somehow been arranged into a story that pointed toward only one person. Adrian read every page in complete silence while the council chamber remained still enough to hear the rain striking the tall windows. No one openly demanded punishment. They only insisted that the kingdom deserved answers. Adrian dismissed everyone except Evelyn. Minutes later, she entered the chamber wearing the same soft blue dress she often chose for ordinary days. She looked around the nearly empty room before meeting Adrian's eyes. The warmth she had always found there was hidden behind the weight of responsibility. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt far heavier than any argument. Adrian finally stepped forward, placing one hand on the table between them. "There are questions I cannot ignore anymore," he said quietly. "I need you to help me understand what is happening." Evelyn studied his face with heartbreaking calm. She knew immediately that someone had succeeded in placing doubt where trust had once lived. She could have explained every misunderstanding. She could have revealed every conversation, every missing detail, every carefully planned deception. But she also knew that revealing the entire truth would expose a secret she had protected for months, one that would force Adrian to choose between his crown and the woman standing before him. She lowered her eyes for only a second before lifting them again with the same gentle strength he had always admired. "If I answer every question today," she whispered, "will your heart truly believe me?" Adrian hesitated. The pause lasted only a heartbeat, yet it became the loudest answer either of them heard. Evelyn smiled softly, though tears quietly gathered along her lashes. Not because he had accused her, but because she realized he no longer possessed the certainty that love once gave him. She reached into the pocket of her coat and removed the silver pendant that symbolized her place as Luna beside the Alpha King. Countless ceremonies, celebrations, and quiet evenings had found that pendant resting over her heart. Today, her fingers lingered on its smooth surface before she gently placed it upon the polished wooden table. The small sound it made echoed through the chamber like the closing note of a familiar song. Adrian stared at it in disbelief. "Evelyn," he began, taking one hesitant step forward. She raised her hand with quiet grace, stopping him before another word could leave his lips. "You do not have to choose today," she said with remarkable tenderness. "The kingdom needs a king whose heart is clear. I will not become another burden you must carry." Adrian opened his mouth to protest, yet every sentence felt unfinished before it even began. Duty had taught him to question everything. Love begged him not to question her. Caught between both worlds, he remained painfully still. Evelyn brushed away a single tear before it could fall, then offered the same peaceful smile that had comforted so many others through the years. "I hope one day you find the answers you are looking for," she said. Without another word, she turned toward the great doors and walked into the quiet hallway beyond. Her footsteps faded slowly until only the sound of falling rain remained. Adrian stood alone inside the council chamber, staring at the silver pendant resting beneath the morning light. He reached for it only after she had disappeared from sight, never realizing that the woman who had just walked away was carrying a farewell far deeper than either of them could yet understand. By the time the castle bells announced the next sunrise, Blackstone Keep no longer felt like home. The halls echoed with quiet conversations that stopped whenever Adrian Blackwood passed by, yet he barely noticed them. His thoughts remained fixed on the silver pendant resting inside his desk drawer. He had picked it up countless times through the night, turning it over in his hands, remembering the day he had fastened it around Evelyn Carter's neck beneath a sky filled with spring blossoms. Back then, he had promised she would never carry the burdens of the kingdom alone. Somewhere along the way, he had allowed that promise to disappear beneath endless meetings and impossible responsibilities. As another council session began, Adrian expected the discussion to revolve around trade routes and border patrols. Instead, an elderly royal archivist requested permission to speak. The old man had served 3 generations of rulers and rarely interrupted official proceedings. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a weathered ledger upon the council table. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I believe someone altered the official records." The room fell silent. Adrian opened the ledger and immediately noticed pages that had been replaced with newer parchment. Hidden beneath the binding were faint impressions from the original entries. With remarkable patience, the archivist revealed document after document, each exposing small but deliberate changes. Dates had been shifted. Messages had been copied incorrectly. Private meetings had been assigned false locations. Every accusation aimed at Evelyn had been carefully constructed from fragments of truth surrounded by calculated deception. Adrian's heartbeat grew heavier with every page he turned. He looked toward Lady Victoria Ashcroft, whose calm expression remained perfectly composed despite the growing unease spreading through the chamber. Before Adrian could ask a single question, a young messenger hurried inside carrying another sealed envelope discovered beneath a cabinet in the royal correspondence room. The letter had never reached the king because it had been hidden weeks earlier. Adrian broke the seal and recognized Evelyn's graceful handwriting at once. She had written to remind him about an upcoming visit from struggling farming families and had quietly requested additional supplies for children before winter arrived. At the bottom of the page she had added one final sentence. "I know you carry the weight of everyone, so allow me to carry a little of yours whenever I can." Adrian closed his eyes. The word struck him with a sorrow deeper than any accusation ever could. She had never stopped standing beside him. He had simply stopped seeing how faithfully she remained there. One by one, the council members lowered their heads as the truth unfolded. The carefully arranged misunderstandings collapsed under the weight of simple facts. Victoria finally stepped backward, her confidence fading for the first time since arriving at the castle. She offered explanations wrapped in polished language, insisting every mistake had been accidental, every misunderstanding unfortunate. But no explanation could erase what had already been lost. Adrian rose so quickly that his chair slid backward across the polished floor. He did not wait for further discussion. He did not ask another question. Grabbing Evelyn's pendant from his desk, he hurried through the castle corridors with a determination that startled every guard who crossed his path. He reached her chambers only to find the room perfectly neat, the windows open to the cool autumn breeze, and every personal belonging gone except a single folded blanket draped neatly across the chair where she used to read every evening. A housekeeper quietly approached the doorway, her eyes filled with sympathy. "She left before sunrise yesterday, Your Majesty," the woman whispered. She smiled at everyone before she walked away. Adrian looked toward the empty window where golden leaves drifted across the gardens below. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, no royal decree, no loyal army, and no authority beneath his crown could undo a single choice he wished he had never made. Adrian Blackwood left Blackstone Keep before sunrise with only a handful of trusted riders following several hundred yards behind him. He refused the royal carriage, choosing instead the familiar mountain trails that Evelyn had always preferred whenever they escaped the demands of court. The cold autumn air filled his lungs as his horse carried him through forests glowing with gold and crimson leaves, yet every beautiful landscape only reminded him of moments he had failed to appreciate while they were happening. At the first village, he stopped beside the small bakery where Evelyn often purchased warm bread for children whose families struggled through difficult winters. The elderly baker recognized the Alpha King immediately, but surprise quickly softened into sadness when Adrian asked a single question. "Have you seen Evelyn?" The woman smiled gently before pointing toward an empty wooden bench beneath a maple tree. "She sat there 2 mornings ago," the baker answered quietly. "She bought every loaf I had and asked me to give them away after she left. She said someone else would need them more than she would." Adrian looked at the vacant bench, imagining Evelyn sitting there with the peaceful smile she always wore whenever she helped someone without expecting gratitude. He thanked the baker and continued east. Every stop revealed another quiet act of kindness. At a small schoolhouse nearly 15 miles away, the teacher showed Adrian a basket filled with fresh books. "Lady Evelyn delivered these herself," the teacher explained. "She said every child deserves a story that reminds them hope can survive any season." At a nearby farm, an elderly couple welcomed Adrian with warm cider before pointing toward a winding trail disappearing into the hills. "She repaired our fence before dawn," the old farmer said with a grateful smile. "We offered to pay her, but she only asked us to take care of each other." Adrian listened to every memory as though each one were another piece of a life he had somehow overlooked while living beside her. By late afternoon, the journey led him to a quiet lakeside chapel where Evelyn often found peace long before she ever became Luna. The caretaker remembered her immediately. "She rested here yesterday," he said, opening the simple wooden door. "She spent nearly an hour watching the light across the water. She looked tired, but strangely peaceful." Adrian stepped inside. The tiny chapel remained exactly as Evelyn had once described it. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting gentle colors across old wooden floors. Near the final pew rested a single pressed white rose between the pages of a hymn book. Adrian carefully lifted it into his hand, recognizing the flower from the castle gardens. She had carried a piece of home with her all this way. Outside, the lake reflected the fading evening sky while gentle ripples carried fallen leaves toward the distant shore. Adrian searched every path surrounding the chapel until darkness settled across the valley, calling her name into the cool evening air. Only the whisper of the wind answered him. As night approached, one of his riders quietly handed him a folded map marked with reports from nearby villages. Every sighting pointed farther north, always one day ahead of where he arrived. Adrian realized with growing sorrow that he was following not Evelyn herself, but the quiet kindness she continued leaving behind like scattered stars across the kingdom. He closed his hand around the silver pendant resting in his pocket and looked toward the distant mountains disappearing beneath the twilight. For the first time in his life, the Alpha King understood that finding someone was far more difficult after taking their presence for granted, and deep within his heart, an uneasy feeling whispered that time was slipping away faster than even the strongest king could outrun. The northern mountains welcomed the first frost of the season as Adrian Blackwood followed the final trail marked on his weathered map. The journey had already carried him more than 100 miles from Blackstone Keep, yet every person he met spoke of Evelyn Carter with the same quiet admiration. They remembered her gentle smile, her patient words, and the strange sense of peace that seemed to remain long after she continued on her way. No one spoke of a queen. They spoke of a woman who noticed hungry children before elegant banquets, who remembered lonely widows while nobles discussed power, and who somehow made ordinary people feel seen. As the afternoon sun slipped behind pale clouds, Adrian reached a secluded cottage nestled beside a crystal stream. Smoke curled gently from the stone chimney, and rows of late autumn herbs surrounded the small home. An elderly woman opened the wooden door before Adrian even had the chance to knock. Her silver hair rested neatly beneath a knitted shawl, and although surprise briefly crossed her face at the sight of the Alpha King, it quickly gave way to quiet understanding. "You finally came," she said softly. Adrian stared at her. "You know who I am?" The woman nodded. "Evelyn told me you would come eventually. She only hoped it would not be too late." Her words tightened something deep inside his chest. She invited him inside, where the scent of dried lavender and warm tea filled the tiny room. On a small wooden table rested a familiar leather journal. Adrian recognized it immediately. It was the same journal Evelyn had carried with her when she left the castle. His hands trembled as the elderly woman carefully placed it before him. "She asked me to keep this safe until you arrived," she explained. "She said you deserved to know the truth once your heart was ready to hear it." Adrian slowly opened the journal. The earliest pages contained ordinary memories. Castle gardens in spring. Village festivals. Children's birthdays. Small moments he had forgotten but Evelyn had treasured. Then the entries gradually changed. He read about sleepless nights she had hidden behind gentle smiles. He learned that for nearly a year she had quietly visited the ancient moon shrine each month, offering part of her own life energy to strengthen the protective blessing surrounding Blackstone Keep. The blessing had shielded the kingdom from an old curse lingering beneath the northern mountains, but every visit left Evelyn weaker than before. She never recorded a single complaint. Instead, every page carried only one hope. If Adrian never has to carry this burden himself, then every sacrifice is worth it. Adrian's vision blurred. He turned another page and found sketches of the kingdom's children, pressed flowers collected during their walks together, and unfinished letters she had never intended him to read. One sentence stopped him completely. "If the day comes when I can no longer stand beside him, I pray he never blames himself. Loving him has already been the greatest gift my life could receive." Adrian closed the journal against his chest, unable to breathe through the weight of what he had just discovered. Every quiet smile, every tired glance, every moment she claimed the changing seasons had left her weary suddenly became painfully clear. The elderly woman rested a gentle hand upon the table. "She left before sunrise this morning," she whispered. She could barely hide her exhaustion anymore, but she still smiled when she spoke of you. "She asked me to remind you of something if you ever came searching." Adrian lifted his eyes. The woman smiled sadly. "She said love should never become another reason for regret." Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted silently across the mountain valley as Adrian hurried toward the waiting trail, holding the journal close, finally understanding that the woman he had been chasing had been carrying both his kingdom and his future with quiet devotion all along, and now every passing hour mattered more than ever before. Snow covered the mountain path in a quiet blanket of white as Adrian Blackwood urged his horse forward through the fading afternoon light. Every gust of cold wind stung his face, but nothing hurt more than the words written in Evelyn Carter's journal. They echoed inside his heart with every mile. She had never asked for recognition. She had never wanted gratitude. She had only wished for his happiness, even when it slowly cost her own strength. As the trail climbed higher into the mountains, Adrian noticed faint footprints leading away from the road toward a peaceful ridge overlooking an endless valley of snow-covered pine trees. His heartbeat quickened. He left his horse behind and hurried through the untouched snow, calling her name again and again until the sound disappeared into the silent wilderness. At the edge of the ridge stood a small wooden cabin surrounded by wild evergreen trees. Thin smoke drifted gently from the chimney, and warm light glowed through a single window. Adrian stopped for only a moment before pushing open the simple wooden gate. There she was. Evelyn sat quietly on a weathered bench wrapped in the same pale shawl she had carried from Blackstone Keep. Her chestnut hair moved softly in the winter breeze, and the setting sun painted golden light across her peaceful face. She looked thinner than he remembered, yet somehow more radiant than ever. When she heard his footsteps, she slowly turned toward him. Surprise filled her blue eyes for only an instant before it melted into the familiar gentle smile that had always made every place feel like home. "You found me," she whispered. Adrian crossed the snowy yard without hesitation and dropped to his knees before her, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. They felt colder than he remembered, but she gently closed her fingers around his. For several long moments neither of them spoke. The silence carried every word they had failed to say during the months they had spent standing only a few feet apart. Finally Adrian looked into her eyes, unable to hide the tears gathering there. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I should have trusted you before I trusted doubt. I should have listened before I listened to rumors. I should have seen how much you were carrying alone." Evelyn slowly lifted one hand and brushed a snowflake from his dark hair, smiling with heartbreaking tenderness. "You carried an entire kingdom," she answered softly. "I only wanted to make that burden lighter." Adrian shook his head. "You carried me." His voice broke under the weight of the truth. "And I never even realized it." Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks, though her smile never disappeared. "Do not let regret become the story you tell yourself forever," she whispered. "Love is not measured by perfect moments. It is measured by what we choose after we discover our mistakes." Adrian carefully removed the silver pendant from his coat pocket. Its polished surface reflected the fading sunlight as he placed it gently into her hands. "Come home," he pleaded. "Let me spend every tomorrow proving that I can become the man you always believed I was." Evelyn lowered her eyes to the pendant before looking back at him. The mountain wind carried a quiet stillness across the valley as she rested her forehead lightly against his. "I have always believed in you, Adrian," she said. "That was never the question." She drew a slow breath and looked toward the horizon where the last light of day touched the snow-covered peaks. "I only prayed that one day you would believe in yourself enough to let someone stand beside you." Adrian closed his eyes as emotion overwhelmed every wall he had built around his heart. Holding both of her hands as gently as if they were the most precious thing in the world, he silently promised himself that if tomorrow still belonged to them, he would never again allow love to wait behind duty, even though somewhere deep inside, he could not escape the growing fear that tomorrow might already be slipping beyond his reach. Morning arrived slowly over the mountain valley, painting the snow with soft shades of gold that seemed almost too beautiful for a world that had known so much regret. Adrian Blackwood had not moved from Evelyn Carter's side. They sat together on the wooden bench as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the quiet landscape, speaking not with hurried promises but with the peaceful honesty that only comes after pride has finally surrendered. Evelyn rested her head lightly against his shoulder while he held her hand as though he feared even the smallest distance between them. For the first time in many months, there were no council meetings waiting beyond the door, no reports demanding immediate attention, and no voices telling the Alpha King what mattered most. There was only the gentle rhythm of two hearts finally finding the courage to listen to one another. Adrian smiled through eyes still carrying traces of yesterday's tears. "Come back with me," he whispered again. "Not because the kingdom needs its Luna, but because I need the woman who taught me what a home truly feels like." Evelyn looked toward the endless mountains before answering. "If I return, nothing can be the way it was." Adrian nodded without hesitation. I do not want what we had before. I want something better. She searched his face for a long moment and saw no crown, no title, no distance. She saw only the man she had believed in from the very beginning. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, gentle and warm like the first day of spring after a long winter. Then let us begin again, she said. Weeks later, Blackstone Keep welcomed them home beneath clear blue skies. Yet the castle itself had changed because Adrian had changed. The council chamber that had once separated him from everyone he loved now opened its doors to every village elder, teacher, healer, and farmer each month. Decisions were no longer made behind silence alone. They were made by listening first. The grand dining hall always reserved a place for children visiting from distant towns, just as Evelyn had once wished. Gardens expanded beyond the castle walls so families could gather together without fear of being forgotten. Every servant was greeted by name because Adrian had finally learned that respect was not measured by rank but by kindness. Lady Victoria Ashcroft quietly left the kingdom soon afterward, while the truth behind every deception was preserved within the royal archives as a reminder that suspicion should never replace trust. The silver pendant once left behind on the council table returned to its rightful place around Evelyn's neck, not as a symbol of duty but as a promise renewed through understanding. Years passed, and visitors traveling through the Northern Territories often asked why the people smiled so easily whenever their king and queen appeared together. The answer was always the same. Their rulers had learned that strength was not found in never making mistakes. True strength was found in admitting them before love disappeared forever. On quiet evenings, Adrian and Evelyn still walked through the castle gardens where white roses bloomed beside the familiar stone paths. Sometimes they said very little, because they no longer feared silence. They had learned that silence shared with trust was far different from silence created by pride. Adrian often reached for Evelyn's hand without thinking, grateful for every ordinary moment he had once believed would always be waiting. As another sunset settled gently beyond Blackstone Keep, he looked at the woman beside him and smiled with a peace that no victory on any battlefield had ever given him. He finally understood that kingdoms could be rebuilt, fortunes could return, and seasons would always change, but the chance to cherish someone who quietly loved you every single day was the rarest gift life could ever offer, and this time, he chose never to let tomorrow steal the words that belonged to today.